Okay, I got this pulled up. So I wanted to go over the lesson that a lot of you guys missed the other day, and I wanted to put this up on Canvas so this could be available to you, especially if you had some questions. You can kind of fast forward through this as you need to and watch what you need to. But to start off, this here is a project that we're going to be starting in a little bit. This is an abstract drawing with texture, and what we're doing today is going to be learning the elements and principles of design, which is going to be helping us with this. Okay. So our objective, aside from learning the elements and principles to help us with the project, is that we will be able to analyze art formally and gaining an understanding and appreciation for the building blocks of art. So a lot of the time when we go to a gallery or art museum, we'll come up to a painting and we won't really know what to think of it. We will look at it and there's going to be a blank canvas and we don't really know why we're looking at it or what to appreciate about it. And that's kind of what we're going to be learning about, is what art is made of and what goes into it a little bit. So start off, you all should have this worksheet that I provided for you guys. And so on here, I have all the different elements and principles of design. And in the top where it says notes, that's where I'm going to want you guys to be taking notes during this video. In the next video, I'll talk a little bit more about the table and the numbers on the back of the page. And so just for now, make sure to put your name on the page at the top where it says names and group, and then write your notes in there. And if you run out of note space, you can turn it over and write a little bit more on the back side. Okay, but I would suggest you take notes because you need to know these words and understand what they mean, because we're going to be using these words and we're going to formally analyze our own painting. So I'm going to show you guys in the next video how to analyze a painting, and then you're going to have to do it on your own. So you need to make sure you understand what these things mean. Okay. So the elements of design, I like to think of them as the building blocks of art. They are the construction material that we need to build. So it's the brick, it's the steel, it's the wood. All those things have different purposes, but we need them to build a house, right? But at the same time, we need tools. If we don't have tools, we can't build a house because we need to have a hammer to put the nail in the wood. And if we don't have the hammer, it gets kind of tricky to build anything. And so the principles, they kind of design and kind of make those elements work together. Okay. And it kind of helps create interest in our artwork, and it helps communicate what we're looking at. Okay. And I have this scale here. Variation and repetition, they are principles of design. And I have them on a scale here because they're very much related. Because if you have a lot of repetition, it'll kind of look like a grocery store where everything is very organized and is repeated again and again. And variation, it kind of looks chaotic. Well, sometimes you'll have artwork on both sides. Sometimes you'll have artwork that's in the middle or to the right or to the left of the spectrum. And so when we're looking at artwork, we need to think about this. Where on the spectrum is our painting? Because sometimes we'll have a lot and sometimes we'll have a little, or maybe sometimes even both. And so you need to be thinking about those kind of things. So with the elements, first I'm going to talk a little bit about line. So there's lots of different kinds of line. Here we have a painting by Jackson Pollock, and he has used line in his painting through the splatter paint, right, that he's thrown on the canvas. And then on the right, we have a rock sculpture by Andy Goldsworthy, and he has an implied line by cracking the rocks in the middle and kind of spacing them apart, and it kind of turns into its own kind of line. And lines, they are very important. They are one of the main basis of our drawings, right? You have to draw with lines a lot of the time to be able to get shapes or to get texture. It's one of those things that we need to understand. When we're in elementary school, we scribble a whole bunch, right? And so when we're little, we kind of take all these scribbles and they kind of become a bank of lines that we can use in the back of our head. We don't realize it, but intuitively, we use these kinds of scribbles to make our different drawings in the future and to draw our letters and things like that. And so it's really important that we have all these different kinds of lines in our life. So here we have shapes. So we have uh, implied shapes. Like here we have a triangle where it's an implied shape. And then here we have positive and negative shapes. A positive shape is when the shape is like the actual sculpture, and then a negative shape would be like the space behind it, right? And so sometimes in drawings, we'll have a drawing that looks kind of like this, where it will be like black behind it, and then we'll have maybe a white drawing on the front or something like that. And then shapes can be used in other ways. Like here on the right, we have an abstract drawing where there's shapes. And then we have a drawing here of a fish where the shapes are used together to make an actual image. So shape is extremely important as well. Color, there's lots of things that are important with color. So we have different temperatures that we need to look at. There's warm temperatures, there's cool temperatures, there's color schemes that we can see. Here we have a painting by Picasso where the whole thing is monochromatic and it's cool. And so it creates a sense of loneliness, right? And so that's something we need to be thinking about in our paintings when we're painting them, is what kind of feeling do I want to evoke when I am designing my painting? So that's color. And then with value, you guys remember, right? It's shade. It's everything from white to gray to black. And you can use it to make something look 3D, like here. And then we can use it to get dimension and to add contrast, like with this feather. It's kind of a scale of light to dark, all the different shades. And we can have value that is just one block color, but we can also have a gradation. That's something that's really important with value, is the type of edge we have. Like here it's a hard edge on the cube, and then on the sphere it's a little bit softer. It's not such a hard line right there. It's a little bit softer of a shading. And because of that, it would be called a soft edge. Here we have texture, so implied texture. It looks like it's something you could touch, but in reality, can't. So that's implied texture. Actual texture is this on the left, where we have some mud that's all cracked and you could touch it. Sometimes there's paintings like that, like here on the bottom. That could be made with oil paint or acrylic paint, and you can actually touch that after it dries, and that would be actual texture. So remember the difference between those two things. So with principles, we have balance. That's one of the first ones I have written down. And so there's symmetrical balance, there's asymmetrical balance, and I like to think of visual weight as well as something within that category. And so with asymmetrical balance, you can have two different things that kind of weigh each other out. Like these houses, they're different shapes, but they kind of take up the same amount of mass in the area, right? And then here on the left, we have some symmetry between each of these things. And then with the compass on the left, that's radiosymmetry. Might look up the word more correctly for that, but you can kind of see it's the same all the way around. And you can fold it multiple times and it would look the same. And that's kind of the purpose of it. And at the bottom, we have something we call visual weight, where this red thing that the man is carrying, this, I think it's a bag, it takes up a lot of visual weights. It takes up a lot of our focus when we look at this. But everything else around it kind of we look at almost just as much because it takes up so much space. If we had a small item that was gray, we wouldn't be looking at it as much. But because there's so much gray, we look at all of it and then we go to the red and then we go to the gray and we go back and forth, and that's how it kind of creates a balance. So we have variation and repetition here. So you can look at this log here, and there's so many cracks. It's repeated over and over and over again, but not one crack is exactly the same. And so that's the variation here. So we have the repetition of the cracks, but they vary. They're different kinds of cracks, right? And we can look at that with the pattern as well. Pattern things are repeated, but each line there's something slightly different, even though they have the same colors and maybe similar lines. And so that's something to think about as well. So with proportion and scale, what you can see is that we have this movie, The Greatest Showman, and they put the most important character as the biggest person. That's called hierarchy scale. And so what that means is the most important thing is going to be the biggest. And so that's normally in a movie, this first person right in the front. That's going to be the biggest person you see. And then in the middle, we have something called foreshortening, which is when something is right in front of you, like your arm, and you're trying to draw that, it's going to appear bigger than the head. That kind of happens here on the left because how close this man is to us versus the woman's further back, it looks like he's trying to eat her, right? Even though it's not true, it appears that way because he is changing the scale, right? One item that you choose is going to be bigger than everything else. You can also change the size of maybe one aspect of what you're drawing. So there's this painting that I really like where they have household items and they're the size of the whole room. And the whole point of it is that they kind of blew up these household items like a toothbrush and made it the size of your bed because they wanted to show you the importance of scale. Because realistically, a toothbrush wouldn't be the size of your bed, it would be a lot smaller. But because of the use of scale, it's a lot bigger, and they're making a statement about that. And so, going off of that, this is an important principle to kind of play around with and that you can use in your artwork sometimes. Contrast is something that's very big. And so with contrast, we can have things that are opposite together to make other things kind of pop, right? So we have contrasting colors here at the bottom. We have contrasting textures here where there's a smooth texture and a rough texture. We can have contrasting values. So we can have something really light with something dark. We could have contrasting temperatures, so something warm with something cool. You can contrast the type of lines, the type of shapes. There's lots of different kinds of contrast. And so to kind of remember contrast, it's something the opposite to make the focal point pop, okay? And so something you really should write down is what a focal point is. So the focal point is what the artist wants you to focus on, right? It kind of makes sense that way. So with this wave here, it's pointing at the mountain. The mountain is our focal point. But the cool thing is they're using line and shape to do this, okay? And the use of line and shape to point at the focal point we call emphasis, right? Because they're emphasizing where the focal point is. You can see this on the right where the lines are pointing to the blue circle, and below all the contrast is pointing out the red umbrella, right? It's emphasizing the umbrella. And same thing here on the left with the apple. The blurriness to the focus kind of draws our attention to the apple. So it's emphasizing where the focal point is. So you need to remember what a focal point is. That's very important. And so here we have unity and harmony. And so if I were to ask you, what were the things that would tell you that all these different parts of the painting or drawing tie these together, you'd probably say here on the left, you say the dots or the orange, right? Because everything has dots or is orange. And then here on the right, you say, well, there's lots of crows. Well, the thing is, to have unity or harmony, you just need to have one of the elements the same in all consistently throughout all of the painting or the drawing, right? And so here on the left, there's orange in all of the objects. And so because of that, it's unified. And also because of the dots. If there weren't dots and they had a different stripe or a different color, something would just look out of place. It wouldn't look right. How I like to think of it is that if we are, for example, drawing a landscape drawing and we have everything shaded in except for the log, right? And we go up to our teacher and we're like, what's wrong? Why doesn't this look right? And I could easily look at it and be like, well, you have the shading all the same throughout the whole thing except for the log. And so because of that, the log kind of sticks out like a sore thumb and it looks kind of off. And so that's kind of how we need to think about unity and harmony, is kind of a check. Is everything related to each other? Because in a family, everyone might have a similar eyes or similar smile, but they might look all different, but you can tell they're related. And so our artwork needs to work in a similar way. So my last one I have here is dominance and subordination. And dominance and subordination, that means one thing is going to be really strong and then the other thing is going to be kind of on the weaker side. And so what we want to be strong is our focal point, right? Remember, where does the artist want us to look? That is our focal point. So if we look at this painting on the left by Rembrandt, we can tell our focal point are these two men talking to each other. They are the lightest item. They contrast very much against this black background, right? If you look here on the right, we have these deer, and the deer stick out very much against this background as well, right? And so they're more dominant. Even this front deer is more dominant than this back deer, right? It comes to our attention more. And so that's something you need to think about, is what do I want to be the most important thing, and make sure that that thing is the most important by making everything else more subdued, okay? So that's very important. And so for the next video, I'm going to teach you guys how to do a formal analysis, but I hope this video helped you and that you learned a little bit about how the elements and principles work together. And so if you have any questions, you can email me or just let me know in class and we can talk a little bit more. Okay, I hope this helps. I hope you have a great day.